Right, so welcome to session 2 then, where we start to decolonize a text. So A Key into the Language of America is one of Roger Williams' most famous publications, which he published whilst he was in England in 1643, trying to secure a charter for Rhode Island. A Key not only offers translations of Narragansett words and phrases into English, but it also offers Williams' own ethnographical observations. And I know that many faculty here today use A Key in their classes already, particularly in the Roger Seminar. And when we use it in the Roger Seminar, we often use it as a primary source, as a way to learn about our namesake, his relationship with Indigenous peoples in the area, and as a way to try to understand the Narragansett people's relations with the world around them. Historian Dan Richter has coined the term for a particular historiographical approach of facing east from Indian country as a way to reframe early American history. In this context, that means that instead of sitting on the deck of the Mayflower in 1620, or indeed for us on the Lion as Roger and Mary Williams sailed over in 1631, it means that we try to consider events from a different perspective and center the Narragansett and indeed Pokanoket perspectives. We're here today then to go beyond that, to go beyond facing east and work towards meaningful work of decolonizing a particular text, Williams A Key. We all have a lot to learn as we rethink the stories that we tell in our classroom and beyond, and I look forward to learning with you all this morning. So I'm thrilled to introduce you today to Loren Spears, Narragansett, Executive Director of the Tomaquat Museum. Loren holds a master's in education and received a Doctor of Humane Letters honoris causa from URI for her dedicated work. She's an author, traditional artist, and she shares her cultural knowledge with the public through museum programs. So I'm now, as Jeremy said, going to shut up and listen and hand over to Loren. So bear with me while I just make Loren a co-host. Let me come back to Zoom.
Natasuis Makasini Pashao at Nahai Gansek, Natasuis Loren Spears at English at Nin Nahai Gansek Nahantik, Kanupiam at Aki at Pokanoket Ka Nahai Gansek. So hello everyone. I'm Loren Spears and my traditional name is Makasini Pashao, which is the moccasin flower or the lady slipper. And I am Narragansett Niantic. And I welcome you to the homelands of the Pokanoket and the Narragansett people. And so I'm going to, as soon as she stops sharing, share my screen and share with you about Roger Williams' Key into the Language of America and the process that we went through to create this book, or this new edition of this book, I should say. It was really something that had been going on in our community. I'm on the language committee in our community, and my mother is the chair of that committee, and some of the tribal members and their family members are part of that committee. And we were doing a lot of work around our language over many years before my time for certain. But recently, we were really looking at Roger Williams' Key into the Language and kind of studying it and objecting to some of the things that were said, and then expanding on some of the things that were said in Roger Williams' Key in regards to our people. And so our purpose and goals, now I have to be kind of fast because I normally take an hour to do this, and I have a half an hour, so I'm going to be as quick as I can and try not to get too over-focused on things that aren't important. But what was really important to us is that the book be user-friendly. First, for the Native community that wanted to use it today to support their own language knowledge. Second, for the general public, students, and those scholars that weren't necessarily Old English scholars that wanted to be able to read and dissect Roger Williams. So we updated the English into something common. And then, of course, the most important part for us is that we made references from the Narragansett perspective, and then also some linguistical comments on things that he got wrong. We try to remind people Roger Williams was an immigrant to a new land and with new people, and he didn't understand the language fully, and he didn't understand the people fully. And so we were looking at that and discussing those pieces. These are some of the people. The one person that's missing is Kathleen Bragdon, who is a PhD from William and Mary and a linguist and historian. And we'd worked with her on another language project that we had done. So we brought her in the mix for this project, and we worked on all of those pieces as we mentioned before. One of the things that's really important to me is the acknowledgements of in the book itself. Most importantly, to the Narragansett people that came before us that let us be here today. As Ella Sikatow said once, so long as one person is speaking one word, the language continues. And in reality, in our community, even though it is not a completely fluent language, of course, due to conquest and colonization, it is a language that has been continued. Our community has been continuously using it in names and in general conversation, in ceremony, and in songs all along. And I actually feel really proud because of the work that we've done collectively over the last maybe 30, 40 years. Our young people are much more fluent than I was. I'm 53 this year, well, soon to be 54. And my children know more language at their age than I did at their age. And I'm seeing that with my grandson as well. So it's really important. So all of these people were really instrumental in getting this project underway in different kinds of ways. But it's really, really important to think of those that came before us that allowed us to have elders that were teaching us the language, going to the Longhouse with Ella when I was a child. But I can remember my grandparents talking about doing language classes with a tribal elder that was older than my time, Cecil Addison, and doing language. So that language is really, really important to our community. In the preface, one of my favorite parts of the book, well, let's see, is well, first off, I was the one tortured to write the preface. The group said, "You're it." And one of the big things that we wanted people to know is that we really wanted to have people understand that we didn't change Roger Williams' more particulars. We left them as they were because they were kind of his own creative writing. And we felt that they needed to stay as they were in his original poetic style. But we also wanted to have this edition act as a bridge between the past, the present, and into the future for our next generations. We also wanted people to understand that language changes over time, as do cultural ways. It's really, really important because people sometimes get really stuck on whether you're saying something right, whether our language was fluid and fluent since, contact to now, we still would be pronouncing it different than our ancestors. And I remind people that English speakers do not sound like the Puritans of the 1600s. And we wouldn't either. We're all influenced by different people and different places. We also talked about the fact that Roger Williams was very inconsistent with his spelling. And part of the reason is that in English, it has a lot of consonants that have different multiple sounds, same with the vowels. And so a word like Nicomo can be spelled like 6, 7, 8 different ways and still sound the same. And so we didn't really get hung up on spelling too much because we knew it would become such a problem that we'd spend all our time correcting his spelling. Sometimes we noted it in a footnote. And so on page, the last page of the preface, that's when I have the quote there about Ella saying that so long as one person speaks one word of the language, it continues. And Ella was very instrumental in the 21st century on continuing language. And then that got passed off to my mother. And now it's going to be the next generation of people keeping that going. I know you spent some time on the introduction in your reading. I'm sure if you have a question in particular, I will answer it, but I'm going to just read my favorite part of the introduction. And I'm a little biased. It's all the way to the end in the conclusion. I just read this. Tamaqua Museum has produced and edited this new edition of Roger Williams' Key into the Language of America to highlight Narragansett people's unique view of this celebrated work and reminds readers that Williams was the fortunate beneficiary of Narragansett generosity and wisdom, without which the key could not have been written. Through modern tribal members, we can still hear echoes of the 17th century Narragansett world he tried to convey. I thank you for remembering me. Tabat Miquin Naiaman. Mayan. I always say that kind of struggling. Another thing that we did with the book is we added images, which the original didn't have. We added images from our collection and images from our community. And as you know, Princess Red Wing was Narragansett and Pokanoket. And so that's a nice connector. And I think it reminds us all of the kinship relationships we had with each tribal nation around us, and even farther away up in the northern territories and over to Montauk and Long Island and New York. I think that people in the modern way of thinking about nationhood think about it in a very isolated way, and we had very strong kinship relationships with the nations around us, and that's really important to know. So these are some of the other images that we have here, and I think that those are really important. I spoke to the spoons in particular. On page 34 is the page that has these images in the book. In the book, they're in black and white versus in color, but it's really important for us to think about it. The observation, their women constantly grind all their corn by hand, and that goes along with footnote 30. Corn is considered a symbol of fertility among many indigenous communities, including the Narragansett. And then the footnote continues, they plant it, weed it, gather it, barn it, and pound it, and take as much pain as any people in the world, whose labor is without question one cause of their extraordinary ease of childbirth. This is footnote 31. So this is what we wrote. Williams made assumptions regarding the ease of childbirth because of the manual labor of women in the production of corn. Women not only grew the corn, but also the crops such as beans, squash, and melons. They harvested wild edibles such as field greens, berries, nuts, seeds, roots, and tubers. Along with these activities, they participated in fishing, shellfishing, and collecting maple sap. Men and women worked hard throughout the year to provide food, shelter, tools, and other materials for their community. Each person, as in any society, had roles and responsibilities. You'll notice in the footnotes, if they have no initial in the front, that's the team, the Narragansett team. If it has KB, it stands for Kathleen Bragdon. It was her addition to this footnote was KB. It was a common for English writers of this period to remark upon how hard Native women worked, possibly meant as a slight to Native men. And that was something that was very true, that they were always putting down Indigenous men and their competencies. Again, with images and footnotes and observations there. The knife observation, I think, is a particularly interesting one. Chakwak. Observation. The reason they call themselves Englishmen or Chakwakwak, meaning knife men, is because of the metal knife or chakwak the English used. Prior to the presence of the English, they used stone instead of metal for their knives, awls, blades, hatchets, and hoes. And our footnote says, the Narragansett also used bone and antler for awls, scrapers, and hoes. Today, there are still many Narragansett artists using stone, bone, and antler for making tools and art pieces. So throughout the book, not only do we respond to what Roger has to say, but we also often expand on not only what we were doing historically, but what we're doing today, because it's really important to us that people understand that we're still here, and that we were here then and we're transcending these 400 years and are still here today. We also, on the same page, we correct some of his grammar. So, Sun Pish Wonk Commission, will you give it to me again? The footnote is sun was added for a yes or no question. And in another spot, Pish was added to denote the future tense. Oh, in the same sentence. So Sun Pish, so again means in the future. And he often left out those grammatical pieces because he just didn't understand the rules of the grammar. Along with pictures from our collection, we also had historic maps that were added to the mix to give people an idea of the land and the landscape and the way that it looked then, the way people perceived it when they put it on the maps, the ideas around the land. On page 51, which is the chapter you were asked to read, one of the parts that I really like is this first observation. To hear any news, they sit in a circle, double or triple or more, as their numbers determine. I have seen near 1,000 in a round where English could not have seated near half as many. Every man has his pipe of their tobacco and keeps a deep silence and gives attention to the speaker. And many of them will speak, either relating news or in a consultation, with very emphatical speech and great action, commonly an hour and sometimes 2 hours together. And so our footnote to this, even today, the Narragansett, along with other Native communities, speak in talking circles. We often utilize a feather or stick to denote the speaker. All will listen intently while the speaker shares, and others do not speak until the talking stick or feather is passed to them. Then they all will listen to their words. The second observation on this chapter is Kanumwu and Wanawanwu, Iwu, are words of great flattery which they use to each other, but constantly to their princes at their speeches. And so at their speeches, if the prince are eloquent, they esteem them gods as herod among the Jews. And so footnote 11 goes with the word princes. Narragansett people did not have royalty in the European sense and did not use terms such as prince. Our leaders were and still are known as a sachem or sachemwag. Some Narragansett people today claim that they descend from a royal line of past chiefs such as Ninigret, Canonicus, or Quiapin. However, this concept of royalty was a European construct and is an interpretation that has been adopted over time by some indigenous people. In reality, virtually all of us can say that answer. We all descend from some historical chief. So we all are from a royal line. You know, people can say it in the 20th century and maybe late 19th century, people said it. And I personally think it has to do with the conquest and colonization, and it was a way to uplift our people under this oppression, to claim that. I'm not negating, we have those lines, and those are our leaderships, but the term royalty is what we're debunking. And because that's a Eurocentric construct, and it's also a construct that puts women in their place. I know there were some women that had power, but historically the majority, it was a patriarchal society as opposed to matriarchal. And it's also a pushback against the fact that they look at our women leaders as not leaders, but just wives of the leaders. And that's a Euro construct as well. If you really look at Weetamoo and Quiapin and Wamsuta, they had their own land base. They were leading those people and those communities. So I think that's really, really important. I'm not gonna do all the points that I usually do because we don't have enough time to do all of them. So I will skip ahead to one of these other ones. What one is that? I like to do, let's see. I like this one. This is on page, this is chapter 1273, which is not in this list, but I'm gonna do it nonetheless. Observation by Sequisequan, they acknowledge the sun and adore it as a god or divine power. Our footnote. The Narragansett people respect the earth and celestials. We celebrate and honor the spirit of all creation. However, that does not mean we think of the sun as a god. We honor the gifts of the sun, the light, the heat, the energy, and beauty. The spirit of God is in the sun. Manet, Manatu, or Katantuit are words that mean God, creator, great spirit. Just as in English, we can use many words to describe God. We honor the gifts and spirit of all creation. So, because Tamaquag Museum is the name of our museum, we were founded in Tamaquag Valley, I will do Tamak. Tamak means beavers, or beaver, and Tamaquaquag means beavers, and Tamaquag, the diluted version today, means beavers plural. And that's important because of the fact that our museum is named after that. So the observation is Tamak is a beast of wonder for cutting and pulling great pieces of trees with his teeth. I have often seen fair streams and rivers dammed and stopped up with sticks and earth by them. Upon these dammed up streams, a Tamak builds his house with levels where he sits dry in his chambers or goes into the water at his pleasure. And I just love that description that Roger gave. And, you know, because of colonization and urbanization and industrialization, I should say, there was a real decline in beavers. And the beavers today are nowhere the size of the beavers of long ago. And the beauty of that and the description that he gave, I thought was super powerful. I liked this one on page 95, which is about the sea. And of course, as Eastern Woodland coastal people, the Narragansett, the Pokanoket, the other Wampanoag bands, the Shinnecock, the Niantic, you know, the list goes on. We are ocean-going people. And when you think about our rights today and how they've been stripped from us, it's really important to think about the importance of the sea in our daily round, in our lives, in our historical and contemporary lifeways, and how important that is. So this particular passage is about Mashoon. Mashoon is an Indian boat or dugout canoe made of a pine, oak, or chestnut tree. And so we put in our footnote, canoes were also made out of birch bark because nowhere in this passage do they mention it. And yet we have several historic birch bark canoes in our collections. But they talk about lots of different other kinds of vessels and the adaptation to some of the Eurocentric vessels as well. This is page 112. This happens to be a paint pot. So it's like sometimes they're called an effigy pot if they're shaped like something like a frog or some other animal, but you use your finger and that little hole is only big enough for your finger and the dyes that you put in there to paint your face and paint your body. And it's connected to faith and spirituality. So the observation is this that I want to share with you. This is Roger's observation. Through this feasting and gifts, the devil encourages the pleasantry of their worship, parentheses, as he does all false worships by such plausible earthly arguments of uniformities, universalities, antiquities, immunities, dignities, rewards unto submitters, and the contrary to refusers, end parentheses, so that they run far and near and ask, Hawan Nakamet, who makes a feast? Hawan Nakamek. So our footnote is this. William's perspective is one from the Christian faith, which espouses that all religions not derived from Christianity are the devil's work or heathen, pagan, or infidel. Despite his goal for religious freedom, for which he is most remembered, he was not respectful to the indigenous people's spiritual beliefs. The Narragansett are a prayerful people, greeting the day in prayer, working in prayer, and celebrating in prayer. Nakomo is an example of this faith, giving thanks to the Creator for the blessings in our lives. The Nakomo gifts were perceived by Williams as beyond their means. In our culture, today, we still have Nakomo. We also believe a gift worth giving should almost hurt the giver to give. That shows the respect for the one receiving as well as honoring the Creator. Skip to 120. Peek at where we're at. It's got a few more minutes. So on 120, Inach Nin Anawa, let my words stand, is a very powerful phrase that has been continued down in our community. And the late Ella Sikatow, the Narragansett tribal ethnohistorian, ended most of her invocations or speeches with these powerful words. And I always like to remind people of that, the continuation of the language and the use of the language on throughout time, which is really important. Just noticed a typo there on that page. This is the observation on page 121. I never observed an excess of scandalous sins among them, as commonly seen in Europe. Generally, they don't know the sins of drunkenness and gluttony, although they haven't so much to restrain them, both in respect of knowledge of God and laws of men, that was in parentheses, as English have. A man never hears of crimes among them, such as robberies, murders, adulteries, etc., as he does among the English. I think this is a really powerful statement, because today the stereotypes are all of the above of what Roger Williams just stated we were not. And our footnote is, Europeans introduced alcohol to the indigenous people to manipulate easier access to native resources and land and to gain power. It was truly a tool of war and supported European greed. It is painful how the introduction of these vices were used to gain access to our resources, divide our people, and conquer our nation. So this is chapter 30, painting, and it's this word kamach itiawa wanash. You spoil your face. Oh, kisakwash. Sakwash. And this is the observation, the footnote that we said to that. Oh, because he has an observation. It says, it has been the foolish custom of all barbarous nations to paint and figure their faces and bodies as it is also been our shame and grief. He's also remembering a time when others in Europe did such a thing. Then he writes this is the only more particular I usually read. More particular, truth is a native, naked beauty, but lying invention are but Indian paints. Dissembled hearts is their beauty, but a lie. Truth is the proper beauty of God's saints. Foul are the Indians' hair and painted faces. More foul, such hair, such face is in Israel. And so our footnote, which goes up with the you spoil your face, Williams is representing his Eurocentric or Puritan view regarding our culture, beliefs, spirituality, and mores. We use painting to express ourselves, enhancing or beautifying ourselves for ceremonial purposes, including marriage, rites of passage, death rituals, and many others. The designs and colors used reflect the purpose of the body painting. And so, in this process, we wanted to incorporate as many people. Any process that you do, if you have 1 million people, you don't get it done. So what we did is we had a core group, but we reached out to lots of people in our community, including our language team, our elders, the culture bearers, and our language program. In this bottom, the top picture is elders doing language work. And the bottom picture is youth and adults as part of our language program, where a few years ago we created a whole set of new songs with the idea that language is only vibrant and living if there's new works. You know, we could hold on to just the old, what's been passed, but we can't do that in order to have a vibrant language. And some of these young people now are in college, and one of them, I was just told recently, wrote a whole bunch of songs during pandemic. And so this is the beauty of language, continuation. I'm not a fan of the word reclamation, because for me and our community, I feel like it's always been continued. Even if it was times where it was very poorly continued, it still was being continued and passed on generationally. And so that is part of that importance. And the young people are going to take us back to that fluency. The young lady on the left, who's a young adult and mother now in her late 20s, she wrote one of the most beautiful songs called Sakwan, about spring. We have songs that are representing our different ceremonies today, using our old songs, but introducing our new songs to the mix. And one of the ones that the elders wrote, Kanashawonk, which is a Great Swamp Memorial song, has been thoroughly entrenched in our community. I would say that this music process, time flies so fast, it might have been 8 to 10 years ago now, and those songs are very incorporated into our culture and our communities today. It's really important that all these things get passed down to the next generations that come. these young people in these images as they're graduating, wearing their eagle feathers in honor and practicing their language and doing projects. Both of these students, which are immediate family, one's my daughter, one's my niece, they are in university. They brought their key to the language, their Natick dictionary, their language binders with them off to college because they feel that language is really important. And the little cherub on the right is my grandson, Minakisu Miquin, and the importance of reclaiming the right to name our children in our language. That has really started back in the civil rights era, but it really has built up steam. And today there are many, many, many more Narragansett people being named on their birth certificates in their language and not having to have a separate name as a quote unquote Indian name, which was only forced upon us because of conquest and the force of not being able to name your people without it being a biblical name or an English name and an English surname at that. So today people are reclaiming that right to name their children in the language. And I'm very proud to have my first grandson with the name as well. So with that, I have this last page, which is some resources that you might be interested in. If you're not aware of it, I imagine that you are, the Roger Williams Initiative. It's targeting K-12 schools, but it has a lot of great information. I also did a reflection of the landing painting that's at RISD, and they have like an audio piece for educators. Of course, how to get to this book, The Key into the Language of America from West Home Publishing. The roadtour.org, if you're not familiar with it, we did tour number 35, and we have information, essays, and land-based places, because it's supposed to be road tour, like you can go around Rhode Island to these actual locations, or you can do it virtually. And we do My Antinomy and Canonicus and Ninigrit and Metacom and Quiapin, and the list goes down, and we go all the way down to, you know, people like Ellis and Tarzan Brown and Eleanor and Ferris Dove that own Dovecrest restaurant, and the Narragansett Food Sovereignty Initiative of today. So those are some resources that you can, it's a nice, what I like about the road tour is someone doesn't have to read a whole book, but they can get a good summation of those people's lives and their experiences. And if you haven't listened to the Publix Radio Mosaic podcast, episodes 3 through 6 are all focused on Indigenous people, or the intersection of Indigenous people, Roger Williams and the Pequot Massacre and the Brotherton movement and some of the others. It's very good. I was on the one with Roger Williams, but the rest are also equally good to do. So those are just a few. There's a myriad of course, resources on our website as well, and our YouTube page and so forth that you can check out at your own, but I thought those might be helpful. So I'm gonna pause there and see if I can stop sharing my screen for a moment, and then we can answer and ask questions.
Can I just say that was brilliant, Loren? As always, I learned so much from listening to you. And so thank you for that. We've got around 15 minutes for Q&A. And Loren, would you prefer people to unmute themselves or to post?
Sure, you have a small enough group for that, right?
Okay, perfect. And okay, so if you have questions, we have enough time to unmute.
I can look in the chat if you'd like. Seems like there's some.
I checked back through, Loren, and there's no direct questions for you.
Okay.
There is one question that was, I think, proposed by Christine Haverington. Would you like to ask that question still, Christine, or?
Sure, I'll go ahead and ask the question. From sources that I've read, there's a period, a very significant period in Pokanoket, Narragansett history of conflict, where Narragansett moved in and occupied, and I guess were at war with the Pokanoket, and if my understanding is correct, took over main portions of their territory and became dominant in the area. I know that's historic. I know it's in the past. I know there's no animosity among the tribes today. But I'm interested to know how the Pokanoket people in particular, if Sagamore and his daughter might answer this question specifically, how you think of those animosities that were historical between the Pokanoket and the Narragansett, how you teach them to your children, how you think and feel about that period of the past, because I don't have an understanding of how you got from there to here, and I'd like to receive that that knowledge of how you got from animosity to sharing, compassion, mutual support, and mutual initiatives for your peoples.
You want me to answer that? My daughter's not here now. She had to go to work. All right. Listen, what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of they were related to one another. Metacomet, my Auntie Omi was Metacomet's cousin. Canonicus was Metacomet's uncle. Mika was Metacomet's father. We actually, from the chief's line, Mika or Mexana was one of the Sagamores that they sent up to Boston during the conflict of the Council of Chiefs that went up there. Mika, who was the Massasoit's father, and I'm trying to think of he was married to I can't remember her name, but she was an honorary old thing. So when she told you that Redwing, Princess Redwing, who was a chief before me, was I guess so am I. Basically, but the Massasoit was a great warrior. That's why he had all the wampum belts. He went after Roger Williams because Canonicus gave that land to Providence to Roger Williams, and he said that he didn't have a right to do that. And the reason why he said he didn't have a right to do that is because he said, I never lost any battles to the Narragansetts. In other words, when he had 3,000 warriors, until that time, he was a predominant warrior around in this area. And more territory than any of the other tribes. Our territories went all the way down to the Cape, all the way to Martha's Vineyard Island, Elizabeth Island. All of the islands belong, and at one time, Jamestown also belonged to the Massasoit, but Canonicus wrestled that off of the Massasoit. When after the plague hit our people, we went from a tribe of 3,000 warriors to under 300 warriors, and he placed himself under the authority of Canonicus. And so this is how Canonicus answered to Roger Williams why that land was given to him by Canonicus, because the Massasoit placed himself under his protection. But the Massasoit also made a treaty with the English when they came here, and that was to protect them against. So I don't understand all of that there. I mean, I wish they were around, that I were living in that time so I could understand. But our territories, like I say, because of his prowess as a warrior, he had all of this territory going all the way down the Cape, all the way up to New York State, Scotticook Fall. He was the warrior. And so his uncle, I guess if Mika was the older son, then he would have been the head of the Narragansett tribe. They were brothers. Canonicus and Mika, the Massasoit's father, were brothers. And that's why my Auntie Omi fought with Philip against the English, because that was his cousin. And a lot of people don't realize that these chiefs are all related. And from what I understand, they were all come down from Tassatuck. And Tassatuck was the chief that married his son to his daughter back in the 1500s because he said there was no one worthy to be chief. And so this is where all the chiefs come down from that line. And so Massasoit's father, Mika, was fourth generation from Tassatuck. So basically, like I said, he placed himself under his protection. But then when he took and made that treaty with the English, I guess he felt that he wasn't that was void, null and void. And if you notice it in 1660, Sutter, when he became the chief, I guess his father died, I think, in 1661, but he was on his deathbed when he was up there in Quaboag, North Brookfield area. He came back on the also and said that Providence belongs to us. He said, we never lost any battles to the Narragansett, so they paid him for Providence too. But if you look at when they captured Anawan, who was the head up there at
I'm just going to interrupt. I'm so sorry. I think that your internet is going in and out a little bit. Is that?
Well, it is. Oh, gee.
I think we would just
okay.
hear the last point. Perhaps what we'll do is, that was such a great question, Christine, and the answer thus far has been absolutely brilliant. I'm learning so much. What I'd like to do, and I'm just super mindful of time, is to perhaps hand over to Loren, and we could always come back to you, Bill, in 1 second. So Loren, did you want to take a minute or two to respond, if that's okay?
Sure. You know, I agree with Bill in the sense that the thing that people don't understand is that we had these kinship relationships. And who wrote the text that says that we're enemies? And I feel it's a divide and conquer strategy. You know, just as different people had different area land bases and things, we had lots of tributaries under the Narragansett that were other tribal nations. Niantic, in essence, was a tributary or under the protection of, or an ally with. There's lots of words you can use that kind of shift the way that it sounds. Eurocentric people tend to put it as tributaries, making them less than, versus a kinship relationship with them. And so I think that I tend to use it as an allies or having an allegiance with the Narragansett people. As the Sagamore said, you know, the leaders were related. You know, it's Europeans that have made us, you know, in this whole notion of federal recognition that we're supposed to be just one thing. Most Native people are not one thing. There are many Native tribes and locally, and that's certainly causing problems today with federal recognition processes because of that. But even in these regions, we're all related to each other. When we go back in our genealogy, we're related to each other in Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Narragansett, Pequot, Mohegan, even though they also had times where we're not allied because they kind of dropped down into our territory. But, you know, just to name a few, we were, you know, had allegiances with Shinnecock, Montauk, and others out on Long Island, the what we call the Manistee people today, because they're on that island, but they really are related to us. I'm working on another project, and we actually brought the elders together, and several of them were like, yeah, my grandmother was born on Block Island, this was lived there, and this, you know, we're all related. And that's really important. I think that we have to push back against those primary source documents that are pitting us against each other, and that they're not actually fully factual in the way that they're represented.
Thank you so much for that question and those really interesting responses. I see that we've got a question from Anne Proctor in the chat. Loren, can you see that? Would you like me to read the question to you?
Nope, I can see it. Let me read it. She's okay, so she's talking about Eurocentric museums are rooted in colonialism and in both collecting and practicing and structures of their own. Can you speak to how your institution responds to, rejects, or intersects with those structures? The approaches to living language have been so instructive. I wonder how that shows up in the museum. Okay, so one, we're a first person perspective museum, so we are not ethnographic. In the way that we represent our museum, we're telling our stories from our perspective, and the things that are quote unquote part of the collections, those are our cultural belongings. Our, you know, when I say our, I'm using that a little bit broad, not just Narragansett, but indigenous, our cultural belongings, and these are our stories. So when we're creating decolonizing work. I actually just wrote a chapter for a book all on decolonizing museums. I presented on it quite a few times, but we're constantly working at it, even in our own museum, to make sure we're not superimposing colonized constructs onto our own thinking. And we decolonize the way that we look at our cultural belongings, hence calling them cultural belongings versus objects and, you know, artifacts. We want to put the community and the people and the stories with those cultural belongings, and make sure, even if we don't know the story, that people are aware that there is a story and a history and an intersection between the people and those cultural belongings. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that and decolonizing that. Our bylaws, we have to be 51% or more Native on our board. Our executive director has to be Indigenous. Our frontline education staff have to be Indigenous. They don't have to be Narragansett, but they have to be Indigenous. The work that we do and the writing that we do, one of the reasons that we got really involved in doing this book was that as a museum, we feel that it's really important for us to create more opportunity for more Native people to express their voice, whether that's through the arts, whether that's through performance, whether that's through writing. Our belongings blog is open to anyone. We call it that, belongings as in the cultural items that are within the museum, and belonging as in all people can belong. We do have the right of refusal on podcast posts, but we've partnered with other colleges that are doing Indigenous studies kind of work and had student writers that have contributed to the blog. We've, also have our own staff, Native and non-Native, that contribute to the blog. One of the things that I did recently is I wrote a blog post for NEMA, the New England Museum Association, but I only told them I'd do it for them if they allowed me to do it also in our own blog, which is on a guide to land acknowledgements. If I get asked once a day, just about now, on how to write a land acknowledgement. So I was really happy that I finally wrote it and put it in the blog, and I can just direct people to the blog. But those are the kinds of things that we're really trying to do, is increase Indigenous voice across everything, across education, across institutions. And we do a lot of cultural competency work with educational, from K-12 and universities to corporations, to museums and things like that, decolonizing that work, and also creating culturally competent people in relationship to Indigenous culture, and how some of those same constructs apply for all communities of color.
Wonderful.
I mean, that question I could spend an hour on, so I'll pause there, if not a day.
Well, perhaps one day we'll have a whole day with you, Loren, to hear your full answer. We have time perhaps for one more question. It's 10:48. Does anyone want to ask the final question to Loren?
It looks like Leo Yui has raised his hand.
I have a question. So thank you, Loren, for that beautiful talk. Really very informative. I have a question about, I know that that languages have a lot of variability even within their own cultures. And I know sometimes language has a lot to do with class and presenting a different kind of class depending on who's speaking it. So I'm wondering if there's any record of the language that was recorded by Roger Williams, if that was a language of royalty versus, I know royalty is that of Western origin, but I'm just thinking about Japanese culture too, and how there is this kind of very high language versus low language, or different kind of class languages, and then even within particular dialects. I'm wondering if there's any detail on that. Like when we are repeating these languages, are they really kind of mimicking particular classes within the culture?
So I really don't know if I have an answer to that question, but I'll have an opinion to that question. The opinion is that, that's a Western construct about class, in my opinion. Even though we had leadership, it didn't mean that everybody else was subjugated as less than, and that they weren't interacting and talking with the leadership. So I feel as though Roger Williams was certainly talking to leaders within our communities, sachems and other leaders in our communities, but he was also talking to average people as well. And I don't know as though there was such a great discrepancy between the language and one. What I would say would be different about the language is dialects between tribes that are tribal nations that spoke a slightly different dialect. I mean, Wampanoag and Narragansett are very, very similar. There are some words that we have in Narragansett that they don't have in their language, and there are some words that they have that we don't have, but the base language is very similar. Dialectally, it's different by the prefixes and suffixes, and that's same for the Anishinaabe, which is an Algonquian language as well. I can meet, and I have, elders and leaders that are doing ceremony, and I can make out the majority of what they're saying because the root words are the same, but they have a very strong difference in their dialectal prefixes and suffixes that are very different, and they use a different alphabet altogether, you know, based on Eurocentric alphabets. So it's really different. I can't understand it at all when I'm looking at it on paper, but when I'm listening, I can hear the words. There's lots of words in Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, same place, same people, that is very, very easy to hear. So I think it's more about regional dialectal differences historically, and then certainly languages that have remained fluid, like Anishinaabe, that are, however, they've changed over time. Certainly, if we have no word for something, if we haven't, as our committee or just as individuals, haven't created a word, just as language evolves every day and new words are created, like internet and things like that, if we don't have that, we sometimes borrow from other Algonquian speakers, and we'll just change the dialectal endings and use the root word, because undoubtedly the root word was the same word for us as them.
So are there any, oh, sorry, go ahead. Are there any,
I'm so sorry, I'm just going to interrupt right now. I'm really, really mindful of the time, and it seems like we have a really wonderful conversation, and I know that some people might have things to attend to in this, 8-minute break. So what I'm going to suggest is if you two have like a few minutes to kind of chat privately, and we formally go into break session, and then we'll resume at 11 o'clock on the nose for our third and final session. Before we break, can we just say thank you again to Loren? A brilliant session, and it was a real privilege to learn from you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
yeah, anyone else that has a question, I'm happy to answer it during these 8 minutes as well.
Amazing. I shall take this break, and we'll be back at 11. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
I guess I could ask my question really quickly. Do you know if there's any differences in formality in the ceremonial, when you do ceremonies? Is there a formalistic component to the language there that's different from your kind of daily colloquial language?
Well, we do have specific language that's in ceremony. I don't know as though it's said differently. I mean, colloquial language means that we drop things off that would be formal. So for example, my grandson calls me Comus. Really, Nokomis or Nokumis would be a more appropriate pronunciation. So in lay English, we sometimes throw a hard O into the word, when it really, in our language, we don't have that hard O. We have an oo, an an we don't have that sound, but because we're being influenced by English, sometimes we do. So in colloquial, what you might consider lower class language, that's when you're being lazy and you drop your prefix in particular versus your suffix. I think the prefixes get dropped more because there's words in our language that have to be possessed. Words like grandmother, if you're speaking correctly, have to be possessed. It has to be my grandmother, your grandmother, his or her grandmother, our grandmother. It has to be possessed. And in English, in our English influenced language, we're dropping prefixes. So instead of saying kumis, like my kids called my husband's mother kumis, they called my mother comis or nukomis, which was possessed. My grandson calls me, kumis, but it's dropping the na, which should be there. So it's just like in English, we have, mom, mommy, mother, mother is very formal, so yes, I think human nature, we when we're in our own family groupings and we're just relaxed, we drop correct grammar.
Yeah, yeah.
So in ceremony, that's a really important thing. You're going to be more fluid and more clear and more specific because it's ceremony, as opposed to if you're just chatting with somebody and you're just being casual. I don't know, because our language has had such interruptions along the way, whether I have a perfect example historically of the differentiations of class, but personally, we didn't have class like Western ideological thinking. I mean, even when you read some of the sections in the key with Rod, some of his own things, when I mentioned the Nkomo, part of Nkomo was about spreading the wealth between the community so that no one went without. There were comments, from European people about how everyone had what they need. It was something that we always knew from oral tradition. European researchers also wrote some of these things down. And our cultural mores was made sure that everyone had what they needed. It was communal. Each village, each clan, each community was working to ensure everyone had the housing, the resources, the food, everything that they needed. So there wasn't such a hierarchy in that same way. Yes, there was hierarchy maybe in leadership, because you can't have all leaders, you got to have someone that, a group of someones that are in charge of things, but there wasn't the same Eurocentric classism as there was, in our communities. There just wasn't. And I can't speak for every tribal nation across this nation, but I can certainly speak to this Southern New England region. People took care of their communities, and there was not that classism, which is a Western construct, in my opinion.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So thank you for that answer. I was listening in. You're more than welcome. I can imagine you're incredibly busy to join us for the final hour, but we'll completely understand if you've got other bits and bobs to do at 11.
Yes. I can't stay for long, but I'm going to stay for a few minutes, say hello to Ray as he comes on. I think I saw his face pop up at one moment. And then I'm going to have to go because I have a bunch of back-to-backs. This was a crazy week. Somehow or another, I managed to back-to-back myself all the way to 7 o'clock last night.
Oh, crikey.
Do we have time for one more question quickly for Loren?
I think we do.
Yeah,
good.
Before we do that, can I ask that you just make, I don't know if you've done this already, make Brian the host, if that's okay. He's going to take over, Brian Hendrickson is going to take over sharing his screen. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, we're on top of it. We don't even need to change host to screen share, so it's all good.
Oh, look at that. Excellent. Okay, brilliant. All right, super.
Okay.
We have 2 minutes for one more question, if Loren's okay with that.
Sure.
Okay, and it might not be time to answer this, so I could put it in the chat. It's a specific question, but I thought what a great opportunity to have you here. My Roger Williams students, we visited the museum last year, and it was a great opportunity. So I use the text in the syllabus, but I don't have your copy. So the museum copy, and I wonder how I can order, 75 or have students order that.
Sure.
So my version is different. It's the Applewood Books edition, but I have a specific question, and I ask it just because I have this great opportunity to hear your interpretation, and students ask me about it, and I don't really have a great answer. So there's, I think, 2 references, but one I just quickly found this morning. Chapter 2, which is of eating and entertainment, in my version it's page 13. There's a reference to man-eaters or flesh eaters, and they talk about the flesh of the bark, but it's a little confusing. And
so we talk about that.
Oh, good. You have a footnote.
Yeah, we do, specific to that. In the 1 minute, I don't think I have enough time to answer the question. So
sure.
Definitely from that edition, you can get from if you email me, I can give you the direct to the distribution center for the book, because I don't We might have 75 here. I'm not sure though. But,
can I interject and say that I just set the book in my class, and I can sort that out with you, Shelby. I got
good. So you've got the
the publisher.
Oh, great! Thank you.
Copy because you've got enough students taking it, and then I'll give you the link to the bookstore website, so I can send that via email. And on that, then I'm mindful it is 11 o'clock on the dot. One more time, thank you so much, Loren. And we move into our third and final session now, and I'm going to hand over to Brian.